My name is Flavio Luciani, and I am one of the RIX Forum Program Committee members. I have to say that I feel honored and I feel really proud to chair this event today. Thanks, Rebecca and Bijal, for asking, because today we are going to celebrate a very special event for our association. We are going to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of collaboration and cooperation between us. Let me use a couple of words. We are going to celebrate the anniversary of RIX Association. So thanks to you all who have contributed to making the association what it is today. We have had many beautiful years together, years where we have shared our experiences, years where we have met across Europe during the live RIX meetings. I would like to be a bit optimistic. Hopefully this will be the last virtual RIX forum, and I hope that we will meet again in person in the near future again. So thank you very much to everyone. Also, thank you very much for attending. So now it's time to start the activities. I would like to leave the floor to Eileen Gallagher from INEX for the panel. Enjoy the meeting.
Hi there, everyone. And thank you very much, Flavio, for that very detailed intro. So first off, thank you all for joining us, and thank you very much to the FPC and to Bijal and to Rebecca for all the work that they have done, and a special thanks really to the panelists who've been extraordinarily generous over the last few days to speak to me at length and to speak to each other at length about what it is that they wanted to communicate to everyone today. So absolutely, we welcome questions. We have, I believe, something like an hour and 15 minutes for this part. You know, it's a good time now as we reach 20 years of EuroIX to look at where we've come from. And I guess Rebecca or Bijal will do some of that later on. What we want to do in this section is really look at the future and what it is that we need to consider as we move forward as an organization, as EuroIX, but also as individual IXPs across Europe and further afield. I think pretty much everyone I have spoken to over the last number of weeks has been very clear that there is change happening and that they feel that coming. So we're looking here today at some various things, things like the value that IXPs actually deliver, looking at what the panelists believe they would like to communicate to IXPs about strategic planning and where they should be pointing either financial or internal strategic planning resources. And also just looking at where the actual value of IXPs is. You know, we started off where it was actually, you know, we were mostly set up to achieve better latency. And we're looking at what it is that whether or not that remains true now, or whether or not we're in a situation where the value of IXPs is slightly different. So we'll go through it. Let me introduce the panelists today. First off, we have Mark Daley. Mark is based in London. He's originally from Australia, and he's the Director of Digital Strategy and Business Development at EPSILON. When we spoke over the last week or so, what came through from Mark was that he was very interested in regulation and compliance, especially if you're trying to attract the enterprise members to IXs, and if that's going to be a significant consideration for you in the future. So that was quite interesting, just some of the vertical regulation and compliance issues that exist. A big thing Mark had spoken about was creating less resistance to engaging with the services offered. So we'd be interested to hear from hear from him. Joining us from Munich is Christian Kaufmann, as well as the day job is the VP of Technology at AKAMAI. Christian's also chairperson of the RIPE NCC, and he's president and board member of France IX. In the call with him, he became a self-confessed lover of IXPs, so we thank him for bringing that joy today. And one of the good things really about having Christian today is that he brings the combined view of the IX through France IX with the content provider view through AKAMAI. So we thank him for doing that. And speaking to Christian, one of the big things there was that additional services were key to securing the future of IXPs, and that's something that came through on the call with him. And, you know, one of the clear things that I had written in bold letters after the call was that he was very keen that people realize that IXPs have to live off something in the future. 350 kilometers north of Christian, we have Thomas King. Thomas is joining us from DE-CIX, where he's the CTO in Frankfurt. He's very passionate about innovation. That very much came through in the call with him. So looking forward to hearing more about that. And I think something that came through from Thomas, and I think you'll see as it goes through today, is that he's very keen for the IXP industry to create a change dynamic from inside the industry rather than responding just to the external forces that are there. Joining us from London is Michael Rubinowitz. Michael is the Director of Marketing and Strategy for Connectivity at INTERXION. Automation is pretty much the mantra from Michael, so we'll hear quite a bit of that. He's also talked quite a lot over the last week or so about the digitalization of services at IXPs and also maturing the sales process. I'm not sure today we're going to get into maturing the sales process, but it's a very interesting thought process in terms of how we actually sell what we have as IXPs. So kickstarting it off, one of the first things that we looked at, and this speaks really to Christian's comment to me originally, was, what will IXPs live off in the future? Many of us started off as IXPs. We were very nurtured by the organizations that founded us, supported by them in the teenage years. Failure was very hard because there was so much growth in the industry. But now as mature IXPs, we're in a situation where we have the equivalent of the house, the car, the children to pay for. There's increasing downward pressure on port charges. Where are the revenue streams going to come from in the future? So I'll hand over to Christian on that to just give his insight on that question.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. We talked about that in the preparation of this call a little bit. And as Eileen said, my statement was, we, the IXs, so that's I'm changing hats all day long, so you got to see if you can follow. We have to live off something in the future. So if the transit prices are still going down, and if the equipment gets more expensive, if we have on one side regulation, which probably introduces cost as well, and members or customers, depending on our model, actually having higher demand on what they want from us. Also, the ones who operate IXs in multiple data centers have to backhaul them and need all this overhead and people to manage it, then the question is that enough margin to actually live off in the future? Is the pure IX business where we have a peering LAN good enough, or do we actually need more? And I think some of us as IXs already looked into that in the past, right, and added complementary services to it, either on the peering LAN itself or around the ecosystem, from racks to smart hands to random other parts. And I think that will be increasingly important in the future, so that we are not just relying on one part, which might shrink over time.
Unmute yourself, Eileen. Mark, we had spoken as well about the sustainable future for IXPs and what that extends to. I know you'd spoken quite a lot when we spoke about on-ramps for cloud. So I don't know if you want to go on to that.
Yeah, I mean, my point, Eileen, is around the extension of services, and those services being sort of monetizable, I guess, is things like providing access into the cloud. Sort of one of my mantras, I guess, at the moment is that the application is the new eyeball. And so being able to sort of provide accessibility into things like the cloud service providers, as well as the community members' services too. So if you have a community member who provides like some of the CDNs, security as a service, then providing access directly into that service is monetizable. There are companies out there that would be prepared to pay. So I think in terms of the provision of new types of access services, as well as new services as well. I mean, there are plenty of IXs that have fabrics that essentially could be selling Metro VLAN type services as well. And, the need for an IX is never going to go away. It's going to get bigger and bigger, in my opinion. The point of interconnect is a key conversation, whether you're at a carrier level, whether you're even in the enterprise now. So I think looking for new services and looking for the capabilities that you have within your technology stack and monetizing some of those, I think is a really good starting point.
And that kind of leads on to Thomas. I know, Thomas, that you had spoken about this, that innovation really was the central point for success in the future for IXPs.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I see it. So innovation is what we need to drive. And this covers what Christian and Mark just said. So I think in the peering in the peering business, we should be more innovative and making it easier for our customers to consume this kind of services. Is it by standardizing how route servers function? Because currently, more or less, route servers, of course, they are redistributing BGP routes, right? But on the other hand, how to control them by communities and things like that, that's not clear everywhere. So they behave differently at all the different IXPs out there, and this is worrying customers which we share, or members which we share, right? And so we need to make it easier for them to consume this kind of peering services. Also automation, like Mark pointed out, if they need to change something, our members or customers need to change something in the peering world, let's be just a MAC address or something, increase the capacity for the peering service they need. It should be very easy for them, and it should be on demand and not take sending an email, waiting 2 days until somebody picks it up. And the same is true also if we think a little bit further out of peering, right? Because I think, as Mark just mentioned, we already have quite powerful interconnection infrastructure at our IXPs. So why not providing additional service for our members and customers so that it makes commercially more sense for them to connect to us in the first step by physically connecting to us. Think about the cross-connect charges, especially in some of the more developed hotspots like Amsterdam, London, Frankfurt, of course, and also in the US. They are crazy, and we need to find ways from providing more value for the buck to the customers. And it's just can happen from my point of view by innovation. Is it a cloud on-ramp or virtual PNI? So we should make use of what we have already. And it should be easy, actually, because we have all the ingredients at our hands. So we just need to come up with something here to make it happen.
So Michael, when, just following on from that, you had spoken about that improvement and, new revenue is likely to come from efficiencies and new sources of revenue, that it's the two of those together working in concert.
I mean, that's, as we said, and I think as everybody's said so far, I mean, there is that requirement to respond to continued demands and expectations from users and customers, whether it's port price reduction, it's additional services. But as I think Christian sort of said at the top, that we have to work off on something that we have to live off. But if we look at what we've got, or what the IXP has at its core, it has often a digital interconnect fabric that allows interconnect between a broad range of members and users, which is a really broad community. And I think that's a really, really powerful asset. And I think, as we've all talked about, there are opportunities for additional services as the world does digitize more. People have a broader set of requirements than just peering capabilities. And I think the IXPs are uniquely positioned to be able to address that based on the capabilities and the fabric and the assets that they have. So I think there's an enormous opportunity, there's a need to expand and review the commercial, strategic, financial underpinning. But at the same time, there are great opportunities. I think we have to recognize that we have a rather unique environment, given the ownership nature of most IXPs and the way they operate. But I think there is enough opportunity, whether it's offering more services to our existing member base, or whether it's, as we're beginning to see now, a broader set of users taking an interest in the core offering, the core services that an IXP can offer, i.e. the peering capability. So I think there's opportunities in both directions.
Okay. What came through, and I guess the lasting sort of memory from this area of the discussion was that we started off to deliver peering as a service, and we ended up building an interconnect platform. And actually, the value of those two things has kind of flipped, in that we need to now look at the fact that we have the interconnect platform, and peering is one of the things we deliver off that to either the CDNs or eyeballs, and that dynamic has changed slightly. So I think that's an interesting thing. And I guess it changed the way I was thinking about things, because I was continuing to think about peering, whereas actually what we have is an interconnect platform, and peering is one of the things that we can do off that. Whether or not we exclusively continue to deliver that only it's a choice for IXPs individually, but it's just to realize what you've actually created in there. Going on from that, we talked about the threats in the industry. Regulation is one of the things that seems to be sort of seeping into the side of the industry. Thomas, I know the professionalization of IXPs and why it's necessary was something that you had spoken about. And I wonder if you'd go into a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, definitely. So, we see that IXPs need to professionalize, and I don't mean that in a bad way. If you need just to look at their regulation, which is coming to us in terms of NIS2 directive from the European Union, or also the member state regulation, which is coming in. For instance, in Germany, we have the IT security laws, which just increased what IXPs need to deliver in terms of IT security and reporting and things like that. So this is something where I'm pretty sure we as an IXP community need to step up, and especially the more hobby-like IXPs, which do a great job, right, in terms of providing stability to the internet infrastructure and keep local traffic local, but they will see challenges in how they can run these IXPs tomorrow, and at the same time be in line with the regulation which is coming in and be compliant with that. So I guess I can foresee that this will be an issue pretty soon. We discussed that with other IXP operators in Germany, what that means and how the impact is what is coming from the German law, and it's actually just the German law is just implementing what is written in the NIS2 directive. So we will see quite some challenges here, which will go into the direction of being ISO compliant and things like that. So I guess that will be the next steps which we will take, or which we need to take.
Mm-hmm. And on that, I actually spoke to Evgeny. I think Evgeny's on the call. I think I saw his name in Moscow IX, and he had mentioned that in Russia, they're actually in a position where the IXPs are actually going to become have to be licensed as well. So all of these things add little bits of burden, I guess, on it. Mark, just not just in the NIS2 directive, which is actually coming and is likely to swarm a few more people and more IXs into the regulated space. But there were others in the enterprise space, if organizations, if IXPs are actually going after the enterprise market. Do you want to talk a bit about those and what the requirements are for some of those?
Yeah, I think there's a significant implication in some of the more or later regulatory environments being created where, even as an example, the onus of the supply chain is being put on the enterprise. And so you could have healthcare. So a healthcare service provider has an onus under NIS2 and HIPAA and these other sort of either regulatory or compliance environments that say you are responsible as well for your supply chain. So if you've got patient data that's being or is traversing, let's say, an internet exchange, at some point, firstly, the internet exchange is going to get asked by a carrier or ISP as to how it's managing security elements, et cetera, what it's doing around compliancy. And then secondly, the IX itself may actually be requested by the regulator or the government or other entities to say, okay, answer these questions as well. So I think that's a long-term concern that needs to be addressed. I think there are some IXs that are positioning themselves quite well. They have lobbyists even really in some parliamentary circles looking specifically at the impacts to the IXs. Certainly, I think Thomas and the guys there have their, kind of head basically focused that way. But that's a significant implication because at the end of the day, the data moving around is owned by somebody, and that somebody's probably being regulated, or if not now, very, very soon. And so a big issue to me. It will come in stages, but it will come.
So, Christian, you had mentioned that you felt the impact of this was going to be more keenly felt in the smaller IXPs.
Yeah. So I think for the bigger ones, right, which have more staff and are probably already used to some aspects of it, it's easier. The smaller ones, which now have either, partially a dedicated person for that topic to actually understand what it is and what it means for the rest of the organization, or when there are financial parts implied because you need different equipment or, have to do something specific. I think that will be quite a burden on the smaller ones. But I actually want to echo a little bit what the others before said, right? Every time it's such a cheap stereotype, but every time there is an issue or a challenge, there's also an opportunity, right? I think we, as an industry, always sold ourselves as a best effort platform, right? Because it was kind of convenient. It didn't mean we have to have regulation, or some of us might have SLAs. I guess a majority don't. So if you actually have customers which need that from an end-to-end perspective and which had a fancy MPLS or any other carrier service and couldn't use an IX in the middle because they didn't know what to expect from that one and how they put that into their SLA, now that actually is an opportunity as well, because you can attract customers which probably bypassed you before.
Okay. As the entire industry, I see what's happening at the moment is almost a generational change. I come back to you, Michael, on this. And, what advice would you be giving to, obviously you see a number of IXPs through interaction, and you see how they operate and the challenges that they're experiencing. What would be the advice to the IXPs here today about where to invest the financial resources or where to invest their time in strategic planning in order to be part of that new generation, if they so wish?
I think we've seen a number of comments already, a number of topics already about the need maybe for service evolution or maybe expansion of target markets. But I think there's a couple of key themes that we've talked about, in terms of what's the economic model that underpins this so that we can actually pay the mortgage as you described it, Eileen. I think one of the key themes that I think we talked about a lot is around automation. And I think that is, positive for a number of factors. First of all, we've talked about the need to improve efficiency. So the ability to automate is a direct contributor to efficiency, but I think it's also an enabler for the way the market is going and the way the industry is going, which is for on-demand. And automation is a way to provide an on-demand set of services, which I think is the way, particularly if we start broadening our addressable markets, then that's the way consumers or businesses are looking to consume their technology. So we have to be capable. And I think we talked about, we've got a core capability that exists, which is that interconnect capability and that community who are interconnected already. And I think depending on the direction we take, there may be other issues to think about. So clearly, expanding the service set to the existing community that we have maybe on this call. But then I think one of the points, Christian, you raised in our conversations was, what's the propensity and willingness? So a number of IXPs have experimented and maybe tried to move into adjacent offerings, but to what extent is that, will it be adopted? Does it make sense? And we've got to think about the unique ownership model that we want to make sure that it works for everybody, and particularly stakeholders in community-based organizations. And then the other thing to think about is if we start moving into other directions, particularly like other markets and enterprise, then the nature of those consumers of these services is very, very different. We have a very technically knowledgeable community where the core proposition is actually core to the business that everybody undertakes on this call. We're all involved in one way, shape, or another in underpinning those connectivity services. Mm-hmm. I think if you start going to enterprises, they look very, very different. So we've got to think about how do we engage with them. And I think there's some real challenges that we may need to think about from an operational, a service model, an engagement with those customers. So I think there's a number of factors that we need to be thinking about if we think about those evolutions.
I might go to Thomas there, because that feeds completely into a thing that Thomas had spoken about, was that in our natural or sort of existing membership base of CDNs and eyeballs largely, they use IXPs as one building block and they knit their own solution. Whereas in the enterprise market, they really don't want to knit their own solution. They want somebody coming with the full jumper. So Thomas, do you want to talk a bit about that and the challenges there?
Definitely. So what we see is, as Michael already pointed out, that enterprises are looking for a solution. They are not ready to take peering just as a building block for their interconnection strategy, and then they come up with, I need to have transit here and a few more peering IXPs over there to make really strong digital offering, which they usually need. So if I talk about an enterprise, I think about the Fortune 500 enterprises, right? Because and if you think about a car manufacturer, they complement their traditional offerings with digital services, and these digital services are very important to them, and the experience how you can consume them are crucial. And so they invest into their own infrastructure, building digital infrastructures themselves to deliver this kind of services. However, they are not the wholesale industry partners which we are used to work with, right? The eyeballs and the CDNs, the content providers, they really are looking for solutions. They want to get everything from a one-stop shopping in a high quality, nicely explained to them. A lot of support when setting it up, because they are, as Eileen just mentioned, they are not technically savvy on the same level as we are. And they don't need to be, so we need to help them a lot more. And if we as an IXP industry want to address this target group on a large scale, we need to change how we deliver our services because they are a different target, and we need to address it differently.
Yeah, so, feeding into that, I guess, Mark, you had spoken in relation to this about, more automation and more visibility into the network. And I guess we're slightly going down the enterprise rabbit hole here in terms of strategic planning. So we have to be cautious that we don't forget about our sort of our traditional market in terms of where this strategic plans should be. But do you want to talk a bit about that, about the data intensivity of the enterprises and how that's growing, and then the automation that they require?
Yeah, I think first off, it doesn't matter what business you're in, anything that can be visible, controllable, automatable, I think is attractive right now, whether it's wholesale telecommunications or banking and finance. So anything that you can do as an IX to begin to present the capabilities and the information in a portal environment, even an SDN environment down the track, it is high value, and that appeals to all segments of global industry. So that's a really good thing. I think in terms of automation, it's absolutely important. It's as we move into other industries, things like delivery of service, guarantee of service, visibility of service, and also revenue of service. Bringing those forward, providing single pane of glass, all that kind of stuff is a key. We've spoken about that a little bit already, I guess. But then think about, who do we open up the opportunities to access these types of service? IX as a service, IX function as a service. I think we obviously speak about the enterprise, but to me, there's a huge education process, but I think systems integrators, managed service providers who can be educated to understand the cool concept of the internet exchange, and the ability to access those services in an automated and visible way. I think that's a huge opportunity. I myself spent 2 years working at a company called Capgemini in France, where, as systems and solutions architects, we want tools, and we want tools that are going to create a solution that improves the business for our customer. And the accessibility, the interconnectability of services like IXs, I think is a great untold story for that community right now, who then, as Thomas was saying, they're the guys who orchestrate the solution for their customers. So automation as a service, and the ability to deliver and support those services, I think, are critical in finding those new opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Christian, I know that you were, when we spoke about this, that going back to the needs of the members was a key part of it. And I think you had raised the point that, sometimes we go out and ask members what they want, and then we start delivering these services, but the take-up isn't there. And also you talked about the community, about not going it alone. So I wonder if you talk about that in relation to, if you had to give advice to the collected IXPs here today of where to point their resources in the future, if you would talk about those things.
Sure. I think I would start with echoing what the others said, and with the automation component. And I think the cloud on-ramp providers have, which came later to the market and had a slightly different business model, right, have kind of shown us what you can do from an automation perspective, how fast you can provision a circuit and get it delivered. So in a degree, I see them a little bit as a benchmark in that regard. I guess that part, I would differentiate between two different product types, I guess. One is which kind of fits for all, and I think the automation part fits for all. I think offering whatever rack space, a certain amount of housing hosting that they can connect easy, especially for foreigners, right, which are not familiar with the market or so, I think works in most cases. For the rest, I think it is then about to understand your customer base, because when I looked a little bit around what the different IXPs do, some of them have particular products, some of them not. So it seems to be then a local component, right? It also depends on what your customer base is. Some of the IXs have a lot, whatever, let's say 80-20, even if the numbers are not true, on locals, and then just 20 foreigners, usually CDNs or something like that, were big carriers. And then some others are actually very international and have just 20% of their local stuff out of their own country or home market. And then that depends, of course, what kind of needs you have. So for that, you have to understand what your customers want if you want to give them extra services. And this is the part where I found out that it gets actually quite tricky. I think what you do is you talk to them, as you do general meetings or, at conferences, and then they tell you all kind of things. You might do a survey, and then they give you answers. And every time you kind of give them something cool and shiny, whatever, SLAs, or, you get a closed user group where you get your own VLAN to connect for particular services and all of these things, or, should we go to 5 more data centers and actually give you a bigger reach? Then they all say yes. At the moment where you actually try to sell it to them after you have built it, you might find out that it is not as easy. They, of course, wanted to have it, which doesn't mean that they actually sign up for it. So figuring out what they want and what they actually are capable or willing to pay for might be two very different things. That's at least something I was falling a trap, right? Because I thought if you have a survey and a mandate, then this is what the members want. And then you figure out, yeah, true, but that doesn't mean they pay for it.
Yeah, and you're left managing it forever, even though there's only one user. One of the things that Thomas mentioned there a little while ago was about the issue around cross-connect charges. And, I'd asked yesterday in our planning call about whether or not cross-connect charges were essentially just boiling the frog, and that the IXPs were the frog, that it's part of our pricing that we can't actually control, but it is the price of connecting to the IXP. And I wonder what's your thoughts, maybe if we go back, I suppose, I think Thomas was the one we spoke about this mostly. And you raised it today. What's your thoughts about how you insulate yourself from the cross-connect, the increasing cross-connect charges as an IXP? Because that's the bit you can't control. We might leave Michael out of this conversation, I suppose. Thomas, do you want to pick that up?
Sure. So the cross-connect charge, what can I do about it? I'm afraid you can't do a lot about it. So except of providing more services, more value on that cross-connect to the customer, so that's easier for them to decide, I want to spend that costs for the cross-connect, because at some of our locations, especially in the US, we see that the cross-connect charges is in the same range what we then charge the customer for the actual interconnection service they might consume on our side. So that is really changing over time. And might foresee, and probably Michael can give us an insight into that this might become true in other places of the world as well. So it will not stick, it will not be particular special to the US forever. So we will see that cross-connect pricing, especially at the high density side, go up. And we need to find answers for that. And from my point of view, it's only doable by providing more services, more value to the customers on that cross connect. And this goes in hand with more interconnection services. So peering might be one, and it's still probably a dominant service for us. But others like cloud on-ramps, data center interconnects, paid peering solutions, closed user groups, whatever you name it. I think we need to come up with this to compete here and provide enough services for customers to select us.
Michael, what's your thoughts on how we insulate ourselves from cross-connect charges? If I could be cheeky to put you in that position.
I think it may be a little bit, but I think we're in an open market, and I think a couple of things that we've talked about. One is that I think the service set that I think we are thinking about over time is likely to expand. So actually, I think there's going to be more revenue generated per port, and I think that's the way everybody's talking about it. And I think, look, it's got to be working. It's got to work in a model that works for everybody. You can't, as you said, boil the frog, I think was the phrase you used. So if we tend in that direction, then that's not going to work for anybody, and that's not a sustainable model. So I think, if I step back a moment, the IXP community is important to people like the data center providers. You are a key component of your services, and the services you offer and the services we offer, have a massive degree of synergy, and it's got to work for everybody. So I think that would be a very simple statement. I would say, it's got to work, and if it doesn't work, then that's not going to be sustainable for the long term for anybody in this industry.
Yeah, and you've been very passionate, I think, through all of these conversations about the ecosystem and about everybody working together to create something bigger rather than worrying about how you slice up the current pie. It's make the pie bigger is the answer to it, I suppose, in a way. And I suppose one of the places that we end up with whenever we talk about any of the services we offer is where the value is. And IXP started off, and latency was really the big thing, and removing complexity on the network. What's your thoughts on this, I suppose, coming to Mark, in terms of what you see slightly from the outside, but, you depend on the IXP industry. Where do you see the core value of IXPs? Is it still latency, or, or is that ship sailed? Have we got something else going on?
I think the core value is interconnectivity. I think the way that the world works right now is connecting to each other, whether that's digital, whether it's a human interface or whatever. But in this space, it's connectivity, interconnectivity. There's interconnectivity in transport, and some IXs are sort of becoming both, and that's fine. There's the carriers that complement that, but it's still connectivity. And then the result of the connectivity, the interconnectivity, usually in a local environment, are things like improved experience, improved latency, etc. So the fact is, it's an ecosystem of connectivity. The IXs will never lose that value. There are other companies that are building that value as well, and there's a threat from non-traditional interconnectivity companies, and we know who they are, data center companies, but that value remains the same. It's therefore how you access that, what type of benefits you derive from that, and what kind of service layers you stack over that interconnectivity. It won't lose that value, though. I mean, it's a huge benefit to be able to say you can access 800 companies of all different shapes and sizes through this interconnect. That's the value. Won't lose that value, but there are threats, and therefore you need to build around that value. But the experience and the derivatives, things like latency, that's why you want to access those ecosystems, so to speak.
I see in the comments there, and I don't know if Maria Isabel will unmute herself really and explain what she means here. But Maria Isabel says the core value of IXP should be seen as keepers of net neutrality and do things for the good of the internet. So I don't know, Maria Isabel, if you're able to unmute yourself, if you're in a position to do that, if you want to talk a bit about that.
if she says that, I think that's policy, and I think that's value.
Thank you. Well, the fact is that I think that being the keepers of net neutrality is very important, and we should never lose this value. I think that having or doing things for our users is a key, or for our members or customers. But keep in mind always that we are doing things for the good of the internet, and we are the ones who are taking care of net neutrality. So it's, of course, it's about peering, it's about services, it's about interconnection. It's always been about latency. But don't forget, or I hope we never forget as IXPs, and especially coming from a nonprofit organization, that we're also here to do good for the internet and to keep net neutrality. And sometimes I feel we're missing the point sometimes here.
Yeah, I was in a conversation with some people from a couple of different industries about 3 months ago, and we're kind of talking about this. Their view was that policy, in their words, is different based on what angle you're coming from, what industry you're coming from, and even what governmental organization you're coming from. So when I boil it down and look at core value derived by the IX itself, I see that more as kind of as an outlook or as a policy, which is strivable or a target, but the actual value that we're talking about, why you connect into an IX, is different to that.
Mm-hmm. Christian, do you want to talk a bit about where you see the core value? Is it still latency, or do you think that's evolved into something else?
One gonna see which hat I'm wearing for that answer. Looking from an CDN perspective, right, as a customer or as a member of an IX, I think these days it has shifted a little bit from low latency, where the biggest part is probably the long tail aggregation, right? Having one pipe and then getting the medium-sized and smaller ones all in one, instead of having dedicated PNIs or not having them at all. Is probably the biggest value. The second one, I would say low latency. And I like the parts, but that hasn't manifested in our way too much, every kind of on-ramp or additional services where we probably can do something with it as well if they offer it. So these probably are the values in that order for us.
I suppose the long tail is an interesting one because, we would see with a lot of our, our regional members, our sort of medium to small members, the IX is so fundamentally important to their business model. And I'll come back to you, and again, perhaps a little bit cheekily to you, Christian, to ask if the large CDNs actually really care about their business model, about the business model of the small to medium enterprises. They really only care about the eyeballs, or do they actually care that there is a good market for eyeball networks in a country?
No, I think the local companies, ISPs and carriers a lot, and it's sometimes a little bit hard to differentiate which one is who, right? And then it's probably a labeling thing. But it is not just that we peer on the IXs, and I forgot actually how many we have, 140 ish or so IXs. So we are widely distributed, right? And we have an open peering policy, as everybody knows, nothing new here. So we peer with all of them, and depending on the business model for them and us, we also put clusters in their network. So I think we are very aware of the edge and the smaller ones, if you want to call them that, and also interact with them.
Okay.
Eileen, can I ask Christian a question?
Please.
Christian, as a CDN and knowing that other CDNs as well are starting to create more and more services, like security as an example, do you see the IX as becoming a technology channel for your services? So kind of a different mentality in terms of, how CDNs initially kind of helped evolve the IXs, but now you have kind of different or sort of different services to offer. Is the IX potentially become a technology channel to market for you? I don't mean a commercial channel to market, but a technology enabler. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. To be honest, it also makes sense from a commercial perspective, right? We have channel and retail partners, so could the IX be one, or where do you put technologies on? I think from a technology perspective, we partially do, where we actually partner in at smaller IXs with the IX directly instead of with the partners or with the members. We also tried. I think in one way you can see the IX as part of the edge, depending on where you want to draw the magic line, right? But because the members are all there, and especially if it's geographically a little bit further out, then there's not much difference. So we tried actually a couple of times to do something on a commercial side there as well, define that as the edge, and then cooperate with the IX. We gotta say it didn't work out so far. We'll see if the future is different. But if everybody talks about the magic, whatever, 5G, edge computing, and so on, there could be easily a role there.
Okay, so I know Thomas has to drop out quite soon, so I wanted to come to him. I know, Christian, you had started talking there about the value of the IX being the aggregation of small amounts of many members. And Thomas, that's something that you had also spoken about in terms of the core value of an IXP. So do you want to go on to that?
So yeah, definitely. From my point of view, if you think about an IXP as peering, it's definitely about connecting the local tail, as Christian mentioned, right? Allow the larger ones to connect to smaller networks without setting up dedicated BGP sessions and cross connects and things like that. So it's really about aggregating the long tail and keeping local traffic local. I think that that didn't change much over the last 25 or 20 years. What IXPs provide in the what the value is for peering. It's still true. Okay. Definitely.
And I know you're going to leave soon, so I'll come back to you, Michael, in relation to that question. But I might just ask Thomas the final thing, which is around community. Especially in the context of this being the EURIX's 20th birthday, and the community being such a major part, I suppose, of our emotional attachment to it. Is it still important? And do you see that that's part of securing the future of IXPs? Do you think community is fundamental, or is community just something that us old people in the industry quite like?
So I'm pretty sure that community is important and crucial. I just realized that I'm part of this community for 13 years now, and I learned so much from the different presentations and great discussions I had with great people throughout that time. So it's definitely valuable, and we as DE-CIX, we also pushed in this direction in setting up communities for the Alice looking class, which we developed heavily and made available to as open source, right? So pushing into and making and support the community around Alice looking class. Also, it's true about IX API, where we partnered up with EPSILON, INTERXION, AMSIX Links, NetNode, and a few others to push for the automation. And besides of that, we are contributing heavily to the EURIX community. However, I see a few challenges for the future of EURIX, because from my point of view, I see different groups within the EURIX moving into different directions and at different speeds. And we need to find answers to that, how we allow the community as EURIX to make all this happen without breaking into smaller communities which focus only on particular tasks, which to some extent is currently happening from my point of view. Also the IXP manager community to some extent is coming up with features. So we see different smaller communities. Is it bad or good? I don't know. I think we need to discuss it in a broader set. But I see that we are getting too many smaller communities, and I don't see that as as good. We should make sure that we standardize more, we bring more, the communities more together, and make sure we are all driving in the same direction for the sake of generating value for our customers in that, because it's all about that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I suppose as industries change, people diverge, or organizations diverge in terms of what they want to do, and some stick very clearly. And I think one of the points in the original documents that I was writing up on this is that some will stick to the virtuous peering model that they were set up to deliver, and that's okay. So I don't see the fragmentation as being as big of a deal, perhaps, you know, but I think the standardization thing that you've been very keen on is interesting, and it I think it speaks to the future in many ways. But I think I've kept you 1 minute over the time that you were asking to leave. So thank you very much before you go for your time, Thomas, to do the background and for contributing today. So thank you for that.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care. Michael, I might go back to the original question about where you see the value of IXPs, and you might talk a bit about where, as a data center provider, I guess without getting too siloed into that, but from your customer's perspective, where is the value of IXPs now? Is it still latency, or is it changed to something else?
So I think in talking about value, you know, as I think I touched on previously, there's an enormous commonality between what we're trying to do within the data center community and what the IXPs. Fundamentally, we are providing a mechanism for a community to interconnect and undertake their key business. In this case, we're talking about the internet backbone, the facilitating the peering capabilities that support the internet. So I think there's enormous commonality. I think with regard to the core value, Eileen, that you're asking about, you know, if I step back and think about it, the fundamental technical problem that was trying to be achieved was, you know, how to enable peering and how to provide interconnect capabilities. But I think when you step back and see what exists and what have you got, I think I've heard a lot of people talk about a fabric and interconnect, which is absolutely true. And I think maybe from a technical perspective, we tend to dwell on that. But I think the other thing we should think about is that we have a very, very strong community. And I think the needs of that community are potentially evolving, and there are opportunities for us to take that same physical interconnect in that community, and there are additional services that need to be provided, and there are additional requirements where it makes sense to do things in a common and shared way rather than everybody doing it individually. So I think if there are opportunities, and I do believe there are, that interconnect, that community can be served, I think that's the core capabilities, that's the core value that I think the IXP has. And if the industry, if people are choosing to evolve, there's a lot of value that can be leveraged from that and be taken into adjacent capabilities, as long as it's done within the context of the community that you operate in, which is largely, you know, not-for-profit, self-funding type model. So it's got to be done with the consent of the members in those cases, but fundamentally there's a lot of value, there's a lot of capability there.
It's a shame that Valeria Rossi from Mix is not on today, because we spoke last week, and this, you know, this idea of working together to create a new opportunity is something that she was quite passionate about, and that would need to happen. So it's a shame she's not on today, but I guess for a lot of these things, today is the first day of many discussions about what the future holds and how we carve out a new future. Mark, do you want to talk a bit about, from your perspective, where you see the value of the community in the peering industry, and does it sort of still hold true?
Absolutely. I mean, the industry as such, the technology has been built by the community. I'll use an example though. I spent quite a few years working in the mobile roaming industry, and what I found that they did very well in that industry, which is as technology orientated as the internet itself, was that the organization, the GSM Association, really developed a kind of singular approach to solving problems together and directing sort of lots of and remote resources to focusing on projects that would be important, and then delivering some kind of collaborative solution. I think maybe we can do more. I think maybe Thomas hinted on that before, is really at the organizational level to think about what are common issues we need to address, and being able to kind of bring teams together to focus on that. I think we had a chat yesterday with Christian, and Christian was saying, you know, 35 projects or one project. I think that's a good example, and the community's there. The other thing the GSM Association did very well was to invite the periphery ecosystem in, the manufacturers and suppliers, those types of companies, as they used to have an organizational membership called associate member, and they would be the technology builders, so to speak. and to bring them in a collaborative environment that firstly brought them together, which I think was really interesting. And then secondly, brought the operators and the manufacturers together to work on solving common problems. And it worked very well. I mean, you know, roaming has been a fabulously, massively profitable industry until about 15 months ago. Yeah, I think that community, and understand that maybe that community is a bit bigger than what you initially think about.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, thank you, Mark. So Christian, you know, yesterday when we spoke, I think you held back for a while and then you told us what you really thought. So we might start today's with what you really think and then go on from there about your thoughts on the IXP community.
So let's see, because I actually thought about it more since yesterday, so I might have changed my mind.
I think his original thing yesterday was he was cancelling all your IX dinners. I think that's where he started from, and then we talked him off the cliff.
Something like that. Now, the question about the value of community came up yesterday, and I was hesitant because I thought, I see it from 2 points, right? So I made the statement that we had many, many IXs. So with some IXs, I think it is a pure transactional part, right? If I go to Papua New Guinea and I connect to an IX, I never go there, unfortunately. I don't know any of them. Would I say because I bought a pod, I'm part of the community? No. They don't know who I am, I don't know who they are, and it is purely transactional buying a product. And then there are some IXs, you know, I know for 20 years, and I would actually say I'm part of the community. So it actually depends very much on the context. And now the part which I thought about since yesterday is, I believe it is the question, you're not automatically part of a community. You're as much part of a community as you put work into it, as you hold the connections and actually work with them, if there is a business deal coming together or not, whatever. But that you actually interact with them and are open. So buying a pod doesn't make you part of a community. So it's a question how much interest you have and if you want to be part of the community. Does that sound more positive than yesterday?
A little.
I mean, I think, Eileen, if you know, I think you talked about community. I think amongst this community, I think there is, you just watched the chatter, right? You know, there is a very, I think, Christian, you talked about, there are people we transact with, and then there are people we've done work with over the years, and there is a very strong sense of community. And I think both of those manifest themselves.
I might actually go to Nirani here, because I know Nirani has worked across ICANN, RIPE and other communities. And I wonder what your thoughts, Nirani, are about the future of community and whether or not community has, I suppose, the resilience to survive this automation phase that we're going through.
So you put me on the spot there. Totally.
You're well able.
Well, I think, you know, community is something very abstract, but it's something that doesn't automatically just appear. It's something you build. So I think you should see IXPs as being a catalyst for lots of other things. And IXP that's well run can build a community around it. Just because you put a switch in somewhere doesn't mean they automatically have a community, right? And the community is, I mean, it really just means that you get people to talk to each other. And you do that by organizing events, sometimes by organizing drinks at those events and food. And it's really, I mean, it comes down to, of course, building a community around the IXP, but it really comes down to facilitating different parties, facilitating them discussing like negotiating peering, discussing business and doing all those things. And by doing that, you actually create a platform or a community that they can participate in. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the IXPs with the best events are the ones that are the most successful, right? So it's one tool in the toolbox that IXPs use. But to me, it's part of, you know, I see the IXP as a hub for many different things, added services, you know, creating this interconnection platform that you can use for all sorts of other things, bringing together lots of different players that might not have come together otherwise. You know, if I'm that Papua New Guinea IXP and I want Christian Kaufmann to come over there, I might create an incentive for him to come over by actually having an interesting event and getting him to talk to local access providers, to regulators, to other interesting technical people who can do technology exchange. So I think it's something that you build and foster, and it's not something that automatically continues. If you just, you can build it, you go, it looks pretty and you leave it, but it's something you continuously sort of nurture and foster.
And Cara has said there, I see in the chat, that community is partly culture as well. So that's an interesting twist on it, because you find symmetry in what you see in others that's like you. And that could be, I guess, at a technological level or at a sort of lifestyle level or whatever it might be. So I don't know, are there any questions? I saw some in there, but I think there was discussion in the chat that answered a lot of the questions. But I don't know, has any of the those watching got any questions that they'd like to put to our panelists? No? There's somebody going to be very brave in a minute now, I'm sure. One of the things that came up, when we were doing the areas for discussion here today was other questions that we were left with. And I think it's very clear that, from the places we didn't go, that there's a lot more to discuss. So certainly I think, working with Bijal and with Rebecca, it's worthwhile us actually digging into a lot of these things, a lot of these silos of discussion in a much deeper way, and figuring out how we all move forward. One of the things that came up was whether or not, with PIs, that's creating levels of complexity. Certainly if you're in a medium-sized business and you end up with lots of PIs or even caches or whatever else, it's creating a complexity that originally IXPs were founded to fix. So I wonder, perhaps, Michael, what's your thoughts on that, whether or not that is real? Is that a real thing, or is that just an Eileen thing?
Look, I think overall, everything that we're doing is becoming much, much more complex just because a matter of scale. I mean, that is, if you look at the throughput, the traffic, I think that everything, if you look at what was in place sort of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's a good number to choose, given that we're here. I mean, it's on a completely different scale. So I don't know if it's essentially a different way, or is it, beginning to, we recreated the complexity, as you called it, or is it just a manifestation of the scale of the operations that we are all looking at? And we just look at the traffic that's shifting through the networks as we speak. So I'm not sure is the answer.
Okay.
I'll offer, I'm pretty old, spent 30 plus years in the telco industry. It's cyclical. And what you will see is cycles of diverse connectivity, then a realgam basically of cost saving, functional saving, etc. It's happened for my whole career. And I think at the moment, we're at a stage where we're seeing huge bursts of traffic that justify having individual connections, but then we'll see, we haven't really talked about next generation technologies that are game changers like quantum networking, which will cause that to change again. And so it's cyclical. At the moment, there's huge amounts of traffic that are being generated even just over the last 12 months that are meaning it's justified for me to have a direct interface with somebody, but that will change again. It is definitely cyclical. These cycles are 5 to 10 years. And I think at the moment, we're in a cycle that says actually it costs out quite well sometimes to have a direct relationship with my peer.
And Christian, what's your thoughts on that? Have we just recreated the complexity we were brought about to fix?
I don't think so. I mean, we surely have added complexity, right, from a network layer in many, many various flavors over time. I don't think I never have seen the IX as a savior for complexity. If I peer with 800 people, in an ideal case, I have one big connection to that IX and then get all the peers. That's not particularly complex. If I would, if I'm too lazy, I can even take the route server, right? Then I have one session and I get whatever, 750, whatever the numbers are. That's not complex. If I would move them off the IX, I wouldn't give 800 people a P&I, right? That doesn't make economically any sense. I give 20 of them 130, whatever the number is. That's certainly more complex, but then there are other reasons like cost reasons, performance, reliability, various other reasons. I never have seen an IX as a savior for complexity and migrated my P&Is back to an IX so that my life is better. That sounds good, but wouldn't be true for me. I would agree with the cycles to a degree. I see them actually more on a technology part, right? As we go from 1 gig to 10, from 10 to 100 and so on, you know, then we move on and off of the platform to a bigger degree. If the new technology comes and I get more capacity at an IX, then I don't have to upgrade all the P&Is at once. So I start probably with the IX instead of, you know, upgrading. But then when the IX port gets full, instead of having 1620 or whatever, 3264 there, then I branch into P&Is again. So I see that from a technology perspective rather than from a time perspective. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us. You know, I think some key things that came out of all of this for me that I'm left with is that, you know, there's certainly a feeling among the panelists that there needs to be more coordination towards standardization of certain elements of what we do, particularly to make it more cohesive and more robust for external forces in terms of people, of external organizations encroaching upon the IXP space. So standardization will serve to protect in some ways. And one of the biggest things I think that I've been left with, and I don't know if it's come through to you today, is that, you know, what we started off with here was that peering is now the servant where it was the master. So peering was what we set out to do, and we ended up creating interconnect platforms. And now we have an interconnect platform, very robust interconnect platforms, and peering is one of the things that they can do. And it's really now looking at what other services we can deliver through that, and what other markets we can enable the smooth movement of internet traffic from over our interconnect platform. So I think that was quite interesting in terms of just a visual for me. One of the key things that came through, and it sort of stood as a basic understanding at this stage, is that we need to look at looking for revenue outside of our core markets, because they're needed in order to keep the platforms as secure and as resilient as we want them to be, and ensure that they're in the right places. So I think all of that was very interesting. So thank you very much to the panelists, to Thomas, who had to leave us early, to Michael, to Mark, and to Christian. It's been fantastic for me working with you over the last 2 weeks on this. So I appreciate the time and enthusiasm you gave towards it. To the FPC for creating the panel, and to Rebecca and Bijal for making the magic happen that enabled us not to fall over in the middle. So thank you all very much. And on that, I will say goodbye. I'll hand over. I think Flavio is there.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Also, thanks to you very much, Eileen, for the well-chaired and interesting panel that you have organized.